I'm Chris Bowden. I work for the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, RSPB, and I'm the SAVE Programme Manager and the Vulture Specialist Group co-chair. So I've been working on vultures for almost 20 years now. Vultures, of course, are an unusual group of bird species which are obligate scavengers, feeding only on dead carcasses. There are 23 species worldwide, and they are almost, well over half of them are now in the higher threat categories of IUCN Red List. So they are a group that's really in trouble, Old World and New World. And the threats to vultures and reasons why these declines have been ongoing and caused a lot of concern have been assessed by the Convention of Migratory Species Raptors MOU Multi-Species Action Plan. And in fact, the threats in different parts of the world are different and different priorities, but the predominant threat throughout, and that also includes the New World vultures, is poison baits, so unintentional usually, but the threat of poisons targeting other species normally, but inadvertently killing large numbers of vultures. So that's the top threat. If we look at a little bit more detail at threats in Africa, for example, to vultures there, we see that although poison baits is indeed the overriding threat, we have belief-based use, so people using vulture parts for various so-called medicinal use or other uses, and that actually for Africa may well be the top threat of all. But there is also sentinel poaching, because vultures alert the authorities to poaching events. The vultures end up getting targeted by the poachers themselves. So in Africa, it's one set of threats. In Asia, where of course vultures have a lot of cultural and religious significance, there are different threats, or a different order of threats, I should say. In fact, slightly more similar order of threats in Southeast Asia, but in South Asia, the diclofenac threat, the veterinary use of a painkiller, has inadvertently been the primary reason for the most dramatic declines of all. And there we have the veterinary use of diclofenac. But we've now realized that other drugs are replacing diclofenac, are not only the safe drugs but also other toxic drugs. So still some issues with other drugs as well as diclofenac, particularly for South Asia. But there are other recognized threats in addition to the ones I've mentioned so far. Reduced food availability is a very difficult threat to quantify, but has undoubtedly a problem in some parts. Power infrastructure is a very widespread threat, and one which clearly kills large numbers of vultures. Whether it's having population impacts is again hard to be certain. In parts of Africa it seems pretty clear, and for Egyptian vulture, for example, that is a very important threat. So, but other power infrastructure threats are collisions with wires, collisions with wind turbines. In Spain, 1% of Eurasian griffon vultures are killed by wind turbines. Collisions with vehicles, trains and cars, certainly a localized problem in some areas. Destruction of nest trees and nest habitat, nesting habitat, is clearly an important problem in some areas. Hunting, human disturbance. So that is the full list of the main mortality threats. But so what has the reaction been to overcome or address all these threats? Now, groups such as the Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction consortium, which is what I'm most involved with, has been established. 24 partners working together to agree, prioritize threats. But that's just, well, that's one, and obviously predominant here in Asia. But we've got the IUCN Vulture Specialist Group, established around the same time in 2011. Regional Steering Committee of the Intergovernment Committee for the Asian governments has been established, co-chaired by IUCN Asia. The CMS, Conventional Migratory Species Raptors MOU, has pulled together a multi-species action plan, which I've referred to the threats earlier. But there are national action plans, regional recovery plans, including the SAVE blueprint, which is reviewed annually, and other species-related recovery plans. So that's part of what's happened. There are over 100 actions listed in the multi-species action plan. But of course, as I mentioned, the poison baits being the predominant threat, this is a key one to address, and has been addressed in a lot of detail and with a lot of effort, particularly in Europe, and very successfully. And in Europe, vulture populations are doing relatively well. But poison response protocols, community networks, and other mitigations, and because often poison baits are set against problem mammals, trying to tackle that from a different direction and making sure that people, instead of poisoning those mammals, are properly compensated and various other things. But there's a lot of reactions to that. It is a particularly difficult problem to address, but mortality databases are being developed in all the regions, including Asia, to try and at least understand which threats are predominant, and to make sure we do really understand exactly what level of threat poison baits, for example, is in Asia. Legislation that banning these veterinary drugs, diclofenac and most recently ketoprofen in Bangladesh, has been really important and very successful in probably preventing the total extinction of South Asian vultures. The Indian and Pakistan and Nepal ban back in 2006, really important. But there are other ways of tackling this. Vulture safe zones being established. There's a whole a more localized initiative, awareness work, and we've just had the first vulture safe zone certified as being safe in southern Nepal. There is breeding programs and releases, and tracking of the birds that are released is another initiative. And this graph shows how these approaches, and the vulture safe zone approach in Nepal, has been really successful in the first Asian populations of vultures to start recovering, unlike much of the area. So you can get a lot more information from the SAVE website, but I hope that gives a quick overview of the predominant threats and the reactions for protecting this very vulnerable group of obligate scavengers. Thank you.